I woke up at dawn to check on the tomatoes and found tire tracks cutting straight through the middle of my garden. The wooden trellis my mother built 20 years ago lay snapped in half, the vines she taught me to train dangling like broken fingers. Her rose cuttings, the ones I'd finally coaxed into blooming after 3 years of trying, were crushed into the mud. Deep grooves from heavy wheels had churned the raised beds into chaos, scattering mulch and splitting open the irrigation lines I'd spent 2 weekends installing. I stood there in my pajamas and work boots, staring at what used to be 6 months of careful work, and felt something crack open in my chest that had nothing to do with anger yet. The neighborhood was quiet. No one on Maple Ridge Court in Raleigh was awake except me, and apparently whoever had decided to drive through my backyard sometime after midnight. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures, hands shaking enough that the first few came out blurred. The grass around the garden showed exactly where the vehicle had entered from the common area path, crossed my property line, carved through the beds, and exited toward the cul-de-sac. My name is Adrian Porter, and I'd lived in the Willow Creek subdivision for 4 years. I bought the house right after Mom died because she'd always talked about this neighborhood, always pointed it out when we drove past. She never got to see it. I spent the first 2 years barely maintaining the lawn, working 12-hour shifts at the hospital, coming home to silence and takeout containers. The garden started as something to do with my hands on a Saturday when I couldn't stand being inside anymore. I didn't expect it to matter, but then it became the only thing that did. I walked the perimeter slowly, documenting everything. The tire width suggested a riding mower or small utility vehicle. They'd driven right over the stone border I'd laid, crushing 3 of the pavers. My mother's heirloom tomato plants, the Cherokee purple and Brandywine varieties she'd grown from seeds her grandmother brought from Virginia, were destroyed. I'd been so proud of them. They were finally producing heavy clusters of fruit that were just starting to ripen. The sun came up properly while I was crouched in the dirt trying to salvage a split tomato plant, and that's when I heard footsteps. Adrian? I looked up. Hannah Jordan stood at the property line between our yards, holding 2 coffee mugs, her expression already shifting from concern to horror as she took in the damage. What happened? She set the mugs down on my patio table and came closer, careful to avoid stepping on anything. Was there an accident? Did someone lose control? I don't know yet. My voice came out flat. I just found it like this. Hannah had moved in next door 8 months ago, a quiet woman in her late 30s who kept to herself at first. We'd started talking over the fence line when she noticed me struggling with the garden layout. She had a degree in landscape design, it turned out, though she wasn't practicing anymore. She'd been through a divorce that left her starting over in a new city, working remotely for a marketing firm and rebuilding from scratch. We understood each other without having to explain much. She'd helped me plan the raised beds, suggesting a layout that would maximize the southern exposure. She'd been there the day I planted my mother's rose cuttings, hadn't said anything when I had to stop and sit down for a minute because my hands were shaking. She just waited, then handed me the next cutting when I was ready. This was deliberate, Hannah said quietly, studying the tire tracks. Look at the pattern. They came in, drove through, and left. That's not someone who lost control. That's someone who aimed. I'd been thinking the same thing but hadn't wanted to say it out loud. Do you have cameras? She asked. Doorbell camera on the front. And I installed one by the back door last month. I stood up, wiping dirt off my hands. I haven't checked the footage yet. We went inside. My kitchen was still in bachelor mode, clean enough but obviously belonging to someone who ate most meals standing at the counter. Hannah didn't comment. She'd been inside before, helped me move a bookshelf, stayed for dinner once or twice when we were both too tired to pretend we weren't lonely. I pulled up the security app on my laptop. The back camera had motion activation, and sure enough, there were alerts from 2:17 in the morning. I clicked on the first one. The footage was grainy in the darkness but clear enough. A riding mower, the heavy-duty kind with a grass catcher attachment, rolled into frame from the direction of the common area. The driver wore dark clothing, hard to make out details. But as the mower turned toward the garden, the motion sensor light on my neighbor's garage clicked on, and for 3 clear seconds, I could see exactly who it was. Karren Whitmore, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She sat upright on that mower like she was piloting a tank, her face set in determination. She drove straight through the stone border without hesitation, plowed through the raised beds, circled back through the tomatoes, and crushed the trellis under the rear wheels before continuing toward the street. The whole thing took 90 seconds. "Oh my God," Hannah breathed beside me. "She did it on purpose. You can see her looking at what she's hitting." I played it back twice more to be sure, but there was no question. Karren Whitmore had deliberately destroyed my garden in the middle of the night. "Why would she do this?" Hannah asked. "Have you been fighting with the HOA? Not fighting exactly." I sat back trying to piece it together. "She sent me a violation notice 3 weeks ago saying my garden beds were too close to the property line. I showed her the original approval from when I submitted the landscaping plan. She said the approval was invalid because I'd exceeded the allowed square footage. I measured everything again and sent her the numbers, showed her I was within limits. She didn't respond." "Did she threaten to do anything?" "No, I thought that was the end of it." I looked at the frozen image on screen, Karen's face caught in the light. "I guess it wasn't." Hannah pulled out her phone. "You need to call the police. This is vandalism, maybe even criminal trespass, and you need to file a complaint with the HOA board." Karren is the board. Well, she's the president, and the other 2 members are her friends. They all vote together on everything. Then you need a lawyer. I'd never needed a lawyer before. The idea felt surreal. But I looked at the camera footage again, at the deliberate path of destruction, and knew Hannah was right. This wasn't going to be solved with a phone call and an apology. I called the Raleigh Police Department non-emergency line first. They sent an officer out within an hour, a patient woman named Officer Martinez, who took photos, watched the camera footage, and wrote everything down in careful detail. "Oh, this is pretty clear-cut," she said, standing in what used to be my garden. "You've got video evidence of the HOA president destroying your property. The question is whether you want to pursue criminal charges or handle it civilly." "What's the difference?" "Criminal means we charge her with vandalism and trespassing. She'd go through the court system, possibly face fines or community service. Civil means you sue her for damages, get compensation for what she destroyed. You can do both, but most people pick civil because it's faster, and you actually recover your costs." I thought about it. Part of me wanted to see Karren charged with something, wanted there to be official consequences, but another part just wanted my garden back, wanted compensation for what she'd taken. "Can I decide later?" "You've got time. The statute of limitations gives you a while. For now, I'll file a report documenting everything. You'll get a case number. That'll help if you go to court." Officer Martinez handed me her card. "One more thing. I'd recommend getting a restraining order if she's escalating like this. The video shows premeditation. People who plan revenge like that don't usually stop after one incident." After she left, I stood in the backyard with Hannah, both of us quiet. "I don't understand why she hates the garden so much," I finally said. "It's not hurting anyone. It's not even visible from the street." "It's not about the garden." Hannah crossed her arms, studying the damage. "It's about control. You challenged her authority when you showed her the approval. Some people can't handle that." I'd seen Karren around the neighborhood plenty of times. She was probably in her mid-50s, always dressed in athletic wear despite never appearing to exercise, always carrying a clipboard or her phone like she was documenting violations. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a bumper sticker that said, "I love my HOA." I'd thought it was a joke the first time I saw it. It wasn't. The Willow Creek HOA had a reputation. I'd heard the stories when I bought the house, but figured they were exaggerated. Homeowners associations always had complainers, people who thought any rules were oppressive. I'd grown up in a neighborhood without an HOA, where one guy's yard was full of broken cars and another guy painted his house bright orange. I understood why some organization mattered, but Karren took it further. She measured fence heights with a tape measure. She issued violations for holiday decorations left up past the specified deadline, even by one day. She'd forced 3 different families to repaint their front doors because the shades weren't approved colors. Everyone in Willow Creek either loved her for keeping the neighborhood pristine or hated her for being a tyrant. There wasn't much middle ground. I'd stayed off her radar mostly, kept my lawn mowed, didn't cause problems. The garden was the first time I'd pushed back on anything, and only because I was completely within my rights. The landscaping plan had been approved in writing. I had the email. I'd followed every rule. Apparently that didn't matter. You should call a lawyer today, Hannah said. Document everything before she has time to create a cover story. I don't even know where to start looking. I do. She pulled out her phone and typed something. My divorce lawyer was excellent. She doesn't handle property cases, but she'll know someone who does. Let me text her. Within an hour, I had a name. Robert Chen, a civil litigation attorney in downtown Raleigh who specialized in property disputes and HOA cases. His secretary fit me in for a consultation that afternoon. I spent the morning trying to salvage what I could from the garden. Most of the tomato plants were total losses, ripped out of the ground or snapped at the base. I managed to save 2 that had only been partially crushed. The roses were gone completely, ground into the dirt. I collected the pieces anyway, piling them carefully in a garden waste bag, and had to stop when my eyes started burning. These were my mother's roses, the last living things I had from her garden. She'd spent 30 years cultivating them, learning how to propagate cuttings, nursing them through harsh winters. When she got sick, she made me promise to take cuttings before the house was sold. I'd kept them alive in pots for 2 years before I had the strength to plant them. They'd finally established themselves, finally bloomed. Now they were garbage. Hannah came back over around noon with sandwiches. She didn't ask if I was hungry, just handed me one and sat down on the patio. I called my old therapist, she said after a while. Asked if she had any openings. She does, Thursday at 3. I'm going to go. I looked at her, surprised. Hannah didn't usually talk about things like that directly. This brought some stuff back, she continued, not meeting my eyes. The garden, I mean. Working on it with you, it's been good for me. Reminded me I can create things, that I'm not just rebuilding from damage. Seeing it destroyed like this, it feels personal, even though it's your property. I need to talk to someone before it spirals. I'm sorry, I said. I didn't know it meant that much to you. Don't apologize. I'm telling you because you should probably go too. Not to my therapist, but to someone. I know what that garden meant, your mom's roses, the heirloom tomatoes, all of it. Losing it isn't just about plants. She was right. I knew she was right, but I also knew I didn't have the capacity to process that and deal with Karren and figure out the legal situation all at the same time. One thing at a time. Maybe after this is settled, I said. Just don't wait too long. Hannah finished her sandwich and stood up. I have a meeting at 2, but call me after you see the lawyer. Let me know what he says. Robert Chen's office was in a renovated building near the Capitol, all exposed brick and modern furniture. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, wearing a suit but no tie. He shook my hand, offered coffee, and got straight to business once we sat down. I've looked at the footage you emailed, he said, pulling up the video on his computer screen. This is one of the clearer cases I've seen. Deliberate destruction of property, caught on camera, identifiable perpetrator. The question isn't whether you have a case, it's how you want to proceed. Officer Martinez said I could file criminal charges or sue civilly. Correct. Criminal charges would be handled by the district attorney's office. They'd evaluate whether to prosecute based on the evidence. Given the video, they probably would. Karren Whitmore would face misdemeanor vandalism charges, possibly criminal trespass depending on how the DA wants to frame it. Conviction would mean fines, restitution, possibly probation. But criminal cases take time, and restitution in criminal court tends to be minimal. You'd get some compensation, but probably not enough to cover the full value of what you lost. Civil court is different. We can sue for actual damages, pain and suffering, and in cases of intentional destruction like this, possibly punitive damages. How much are we talking? Chen pulled up a document. I'd need a full inventory, but based on what you described, we're looking at several $1,000s in materials alone. Mature plants, custom trellis, irrigation system, stone borders. Add the sentimental value of heirloom plants, the labor you put in, and the emotional distress of having something tied to your late mother destroyed, we can make a strong case for $20,000 to $30,000. I blinked. For a garden? For deliberate destruction of irreplaceable property by someone in a position of authority who abused that position for personal retaliation. Yes, that's worth $20,000 to $30,000, possibly more depending on the jury. Would this go to a jury? It could. Most cases settle before trial, but given that Karren Whitmore is the HOA president and clearly thinks she's above consequences, she might dig in. Some people would rather spend $50,000 on lawyers than admit they were wrong and pay $10,000 in damages. He wasn't wrong. I'd seen Karren argue with a resident for 20 minutes over a mailbox that was 3 inches too tall. She didn't back down easily. "What's the process?" I asked. "We file a civil complaint in Wake County Court. That officially starts the lawsuit. Karren gets served with papers. She has to respond. Then we go through discovery, which means both sides exchange evidence, take depositions, build their cases. If she doesn't settle, we go to trial. Small claims court maxes out at $10,000, so we'd file in district court for a higher amount. Timeline is usually 6 to 12 months start to finish. A year. A year of dealing with this, of having it hang over my head. It's cool. Is there a faster way? We could try mediation first. A neutral third party helps both sides negotiate. It's not binding unless you reach an agreement, but it can resolve things in a matter of weeks instead of months. The downside is Karren would have to agree to participate, and if she thinks she can bully her way out of this, she won't. What would you do? Chen leaned back in his chair. I'd file the complaint. Hit hard, make it clear you're serious. Include the video evidence, the police report, expert testimony on the value of what was destroyed. Make her understand that she's going to lose and lose big if this goes to trial. Then, see if she's willing to talk. People often get reasonable when they realize the alternative is public humiliation in court. It made sense, and honestly, I wanted Karren to face consequences that meant something. A slap on the wrist and a small fine wouldn't change anything. She'd still be HOA president, still be vindictive, still think she could do whatever she wanted. Let's do it, I said. File the complaint. I'll need a retainer, $5,000 to start. That covers the initial filing, document preparation, and the first phase of discovery. If it goes to trial, we'll need more, but I'll keep you updated on costs. $5,000. I thought about my savings account, the emergency fund I'd been building. This qualified as an emergency. Okay, I said, what do you need from me? We spent the next hour going through everything in detail. Chen had me write out a complete description of the garden, including when I'd planted everything, where I'd gotten the seeds and cuttings, what my mother's connection was to each plant. He had me estimate the hours of labor I'd put in. He asked for copies of the landscaping approval, any correspondence with Karren, the HOA bylaws, my property deed, everything that might be relevant. By the time I left his office, my head was swimming with legal terms and procedures, but I also felt like something was finally moving forward. I wasn't just standing in my destroyed garden anymore. I was doing something. I called Hannah from the parking lot and filled her in. Good, she said firmly. Karren needs to face real consequences. This kind of abuse of power, it's not just about you. She's probably done things like this before, just not as obvious. Chen said it could take up to a year. Then it takes a year. You're not going to let her get away with it just because it's inconvenient. I smiled despite everything. Hannah had a way of cutting through doubt, probably from having to rebuild her own life brick by brick. She didn't have patience for people who avoided hard things. Are you free tonight? I asked. I could use the company. I'll bring pizza. 6 o'clock? Perfect. The next few days were strange. I went to work, did my shifts at Wake Medical Center where I worked as a nurse in the cardiac unit, came home to the destroyed garden, and tried to pretend everything was normal. People at work noticed I was distracted, but I didn't want to explain. It felt too raw, too complicated. Karren, meanwhile, acted like nothing had happened. I saw her driving through the neighborhood in her Lexus, clipboard in hand, inspecting yards. She didn't look my direction. No apology, no acknowledgement, nothing. On Wednesday, a process server delivered the complaint to her house. Chen texted me to confirm it had been served. Now she had 30 days to respond. Thursday evening, I got my first indication of how Karren was going to play this. A letter appeared in my mailbox, printed on official Willow Creek HOA letterhead. Dear Mr. Porter, it has come to our attention that you have made false accusations against a member of the HOA board. The Willow Creek HOA takes such allegations seriously and will be investigating the matter thoroughly. In the meantime, we are issuing a formal violation notice for the unauthorized garden installation on your property, which violates Section 7.3 of the HOA bylaws regarding property modifications. You have 14 days to remove the garden beds and restore the area to grass. Failure to comply will result in fines of $100 per day. Sincerely, the Willow Creek HOA Board. I read it 3 times, anger building with each pass. The unauthorized garden that already had approval. The violation notice issued after she'd already destroyed it. The threat of daily fines. I forwarded it to Chen immediately. His response came within an hour. Perfect! She's creating evidence for us. Don't remove anything. Don't respond to the letter. Let her dig her hole deeper. Hannah came over after I called her, read the letter, and actually laughed, though there wasn't much humor in it. She's panicking, Hannah said. This is what people do when they know they're in trouble. They double down, pretend the whole thing was legitimate HOA business. She's going to claim she was authorized to remove your garden because it was a violation. Will that work? No, because you have approval in writing, and she destroyed your property in the middle of the night without notice. If it was legitimate HOA enforcement, she would have gone through the proper channels. Hearing, written notice, opportunity to cure, all of that. She can't just drive a mower through someone's yard at 2 in the morning and call it enforcement. I wanted to believe she was right, but part of me worried. Karren had been HOA president for 6 years. She knew the system, knew how to manipulate it. What if she'd covered her tracks better than we thought? The weekend came and went. I spent Saturday cleaning up the last of the garden debris, boxing up the broken trellis pieces, coiling the ruined irrigation lines. The space looked empty now, just churned dirt and tire tracks. Some of the neighbors came by to ask what happened. I told them the truth. Most were sympathetic, a few were shocked, 1 or 2 seemed skeptical in a way that suggested they believed Karren's version of events. By Monday, the neighborhood was buzzing. Small subdivisions are like that. News travels fast. I started getting emails from other Willow Creek residents, people I barely knew, sharing their own stories about Karren. One couple had been fined $2,000 for painting their shutters navy instead of black, even though navy was on the approved color list. Another resident had been threatened with a lien on his house for parking his work truck in his driveway overnight. Someone else had been forced to cut down a tree because it was dropping leaves in the common area. The stories piled up in my inbox, a pattern of petty tyranny that had been going on for years. Some people wanted to testify if it went to trial. Others just wanted to share their frustration. A few warned me that Karren had connections on the county planning board, that she'd find ways to make my life difficult. Chen and I met again on Tuesday to go over the response strategy. Karren's lawyer had made contact, a guy named Philip Stroud, who apparently specialized in HOA defense work. He sent an initial response denying everything, Chen said, showing me the email. Claims Karren was conducting approved drainage work on the common area, that she accidentally strayed onto your property due to poor visibility, and that any damage was minimal and unintentional. That's complete garbage. The video shows her driving straight through the beds. There's no drainage work anywhere near my property. And she circled back through the tomatoes deliberately. I know. Stroud knows too, probably. But his job is to defend Karren, and this is the story they're going with. It's weak, but it's what they have. Chen pulled up a calendar on his computer. We're scheduled for a hearing in 3 weeks. The judge will review the initial evidence and set a trial date if we don't settle. I'm going to push for mediation first. See if we can resolve this without a full trial. But you should prepare for the possibility that Karren's going to fight this all the way. Why would she do that? The video is clear. Because admitting she destroyed your garden means admitting she abused her authority as HOA president. It opens her up to removal from the board, possibly other lawsuits from residents she's wronged. She's not fighting over a garden, she's fighting for her position and her ego. That made a bleak kind of sense. People like Karren didn't see other perspectives, didn't accept that they could be wrong. They just escalated until someone forced them to stop. The hearing was scheduled for October 15th in Wake County District Court. I took the day off work, put on the only suit I owned, and met Chen in the courthouse parking lot at 8 in the morning. Remember, he said as we walked in, this is preliminary. The judge is going to review evidence, hear basic arguments, and decide if there's enough for a trial. We're not trying to win today. We're trying to show that your case is solid enough to proceed. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, more like an office conference room with a judge's bench. Karren was already there with Philip Stroud, sitting ramrod straight in a cream-colored pantsuit, her expression set in righteous indignation. She didn't look at me when we entered. Judge Patricia Owens came in a few minutes later, an older black woman with silver hair and an air of someone who'd heard every excuse in the world and wasn't impressed by any of them. She reviewed the case file briefly, then looked up. "That is well. This is a property damage claim arising from an HOA dispute," she said. "Mr. Chen, summarize your client's position." Chen stood. "Your Honor, the plaintiff Adrian Porter claims the defendant Karren Whitmore, in her capacity as president of the Willow Creek HOA, deliberately destroyed his garden in retaliation for challenging an HOA violation notice. We have video evidence showing Ms. Whitmore operating a riding mower through Mr. Porter's property at 2 a.m, causing extensive damage to landscaping, irrigation, and heirloom plants. We're seeking compensatory and punitive damages." Ms. Whitmore's counsel. Philip Stroud stood, adjusting his tie. He was probably in his 60s, with the manner of someone who'd been doing this kind of work too long. "Your Honor, Ms. Whitmore denies any intentional wrongdoing. On the night in question, she was conducting authorized maintenance on the common area drainage system. Due to poor lighting and unclear property boundaries, she inadvertently crossed onto Mr. Porter's property. Any damage was accidental and minimal. Furthermore, Mr. Porter's garden installation violated HOA bylaws, and the HOA was within its rights to require removal." Judge Owens looked unimpressed. "Is there video evidence?" "There is, Your Honor," Chen said. "We've submitted it with our initial filing." "I'd like to see it now." Chen pulled up the footage on his laptop, connecting it to the courtroom monitor. The video played in silence, Karren's face clearly visible in the motion sensor light, the deliberate path through the garden unmistakable. When it finished, Judge Owens turned to Stroud. "That looks intentional, counsel." Stroud cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the video doesn't show what Ms. Whitmore believed she was doing. She thought she was on common area property, conducting approved work. At 2 a.m, drainage issues require immediate attention. And she happened to circle back through the tomato plants twice because of drainage?" Judge Owens didn't wait for an answer. "Mr. Chen, do you have evidence that the garden was approved?" "Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Porter submitted a landscaping plan to the HOA and received written approval 14 months ago. We've included the email correspondence in our filing." Judge Owens reviewed the documents for a long moment. "Ms. Whitmore, did you approve this landscaping plan?" Karren stood, and for the first time since entering the courtroom, she spoke. Her voice was sharp, confident, the tone of someone used to being obeyed. "I did not personally approve it, Your Honor. The previous board secretary handled landscaping approvals, and she failed to follow proper procedures. The approval was invalid." "Do you have evidence it was invalid?" "The bylaws require board vote for any landscaping modifications over 50 square feet. Mr. Porter's garden exceeded that threshold. There's no record of a board vote, therefore the approval was improper." Chen stood again. "Your Honor, the HOA bylaws state that landscaping plans under 100 square feet can be approved by staff without board vote. Mr. Porter's garden is 85 square feet. It fell within the staff approval threshold." "Ms. Whitmore?" Karren's jaw tightened. "The measurements are disputed." "Did you measure the garden before destroying it?" "I did not personally measure it, no." "So you destroyed property based on disputed measurements without verification? In the middle of the night, using HOA equipment?" The courtroom was very quiet. Karren didn't answer immediately, and I could see Stroud lean over to whisper something to her. "I was addressing what I believed to be an unauthorized installation," Karren finally said. "I acted within my authority as HOA president to enforce community standards." Judge Owens closed the file. "Ms. Whitmore, I'm going to say this clearly so there's no misunderstanding. Nothing in your HOA authority allows you to destroy private property without notice, hearing, or due process. If Mr. Porter's garden violated bylaws, your recourse was to issue a violation, hold a hearing, and if necessary, seek a court order. You don't get to take a mower through someone's yard because you don't like their landscaping. Stroud stood quickly. Your Honor, we maintain that any damage was accidental and that Ms. Whitmore was conducting legitimate maintenance. The video contradicts that, counsel. This case is going to trial. Judge Owens pulled out a calendar. We'll set a date for January 7th. That gives both sides time for discovery and depositions. In the meantime, Ms. Whitmore, you are not to have any contact with Mr. Porter or his property. If I hear about any retaliation or further issues, I'll issue a restraining order. Am I clear? Yes, Your Honor, Karren said, her voice tight. We were dismissed. Outside the courtroom, Chen looked satisfied. That went as well as we could have hoped, he said. The judge saw through Karren's story immediately. She's going to be a problem for the defense at trial. What happens now? Discovery. We subpoena HOA records, take depositions from Karren and any other relevant witnesses, build our case. Stroud will do the same from his side, but he doesn't have much to work with. The video's damning, and Karren's explanation doesn't hold up. Do I have to do anything? Sit for a deposition at some point. Stroud will ask you questions under oath about the garden, your interactions with Karren, all of it. Just tell the truth. Don't embellish, don't guess. Stick to what you know for certain. Over the next few weeks, the legal process ground forward in ways that felt both glacially slow and relentlessly consuming. Chen subpoenaed the HOA records and found a trail of questionable decisions Karren had made over the years. She'd approved contracts with her brother's landscaping company without disclosing the conflict of interest. She'd used HOA funds to pay for a new fence around her own property, claiming it benefited the common area. She'd issued violation notices to residents who challenged her authority, regardless of whether violations actually existed. It was a pattern, and it was exactly what we needed to prove this wasn't just about my garden. It was about abuse of power. My deposition was scheduled for early November. Stroud questioned me for 3 hours in Chen's conference room, going over every detail of the garden, every interaction with Karren, every document and email. He tried to make it sound like I'd been deliberately antagonistic, that I'd installed the garden knowing it would cause problems. Isn't it true, Mr. Porter, that you were warned the garden might not comply with HOA standards? Stroud asked at one point. No, I said. I submitted a plan and received approval. No one warned me about anything. But you were aware that HOA approval could be revoked if circumstances changed? I wasn't aware of that, no. And what circumstances changed? I built exactly what I said I would build. The circumstances that changed were the HOA board's understanding of the bylaws governing landscaping modifications. The bylaws didn't change. Karren just decided she didn't like my garden after I challenged her violation notice. Stroud's expression tightened. You're speculating about my client's motivations. I'm describing what happened. She sent me a violation notice. I showed her the approval. She didn't respond. Then a week later, she drove through my garden in the middle of the night. That's not speculation. That's sequence of events. Chen didn't intervene much, letting me answer in my own words. Afterward, he said I'd done well, that Stroud hadn't gotten anything useful. Karren's deposition was a week later. Chen made me listen to the recording, and it was an exercise in frustration. She stuck to her story about accidental damage during drainage work, claiming the video didn't show her full perspective, that she'd been focused on the maintenance task and hadn't realized how far onto my property she'd gone. Why were you conducting drainage work at 2 a.m? Chen asked during the deposition. I received a call from a resident about standing water in the common area. It needed immediate attention to prevent flooding. Which resident called you? I don't recall specifically. Do you have phone records showing the call? I may have. I'd need to check. Did you file any documentation about the drainage work? Work orders, contractor notifications, anything? The work was minor enough that formal documentation wasn't required. Minor enough that you handled it personally with a riding mower instead of calling the landscaping contractor? I was trying to address the issue quickly to prevent further problems. On and on like that, Karren deflecting and minimizing, never quite admitting anything. Chen said it was typical, that defendants rarely confessed during depositions. The point was to lock them into a story so they couldn't change it at trial. Thanksgiving came and went. I spent it with Hannah, both of us too exhausted from our respective struggles to travel anywhere. We cooked a small turkey, watched football, didn't talk about the lawsuit or her therapy or any of the hard things. It was good to just exist for a day without the weight of everything pressing down. December brought more legal maneuvering. Stroud filed a motion to dismiss, claiming there was insufficient evidence of intentional conduct. Chen filed a response with the video evidence, the police report, and testimony from a landscaping expert we'd hired who confirmed the damage was consistent with deliberate destruction, not accidental contact. Judge Owens denied the motion to dismiss. We were going to trial. Chen and I met a week before the trial date to prepare. He walked me through what to expect, how to answer questions on the witness stand, how to stay calm if Stroud tried to rattle me. The key thing to remember is that you're the sympathetic party here, Chen said. You're a nurse who planted a garden to honor your late mother. Karren is an HOA president who destroyed that garden out of spite. Keep that narrative clear, don't get defensive, and let the evidence speak for itself. What if the jury doesn't believe me? They will. Juries don't like bullies, and Karren is going to come across as a bully no matter how much Stroud tries to soften her. Plus, we have video. That's worth more than any testimony. The trial was set for January 7th, a cold Tuesday morning. I barely slept the night before, kept waking up thinking about what I'd say, how I'd describe the garden, whether I'd be able to talk about my mother without breaking down. Hannah texted me at 6 in the morning. You're going to do great. Karren is going down. Call me after. I appreciated the confidence even if I didn't quite feel it myself. The courthouse was busy, people streaming in for various cases. Chen met me at security and we went up to the courtroom together. It was a different room this time, larger, with a jury box and gallery seating. Karren was already there with Stroud, looking composed in a dark suit. Her husband sat behind her, a quiet man I'd seen around the neighborhood but never spoken to. The jury selection took most of the morning. Chen and Stroud questioned potential jurors about their experiences with HOAs, their views on property rights, whether they could be impartial. By lunch, we had 12 jurors and 2 alternates, a mix of ages and backgrounds that Chen said looked favorable. Judge Owens gave preliminary instructions after lunch, explaining that this was a civil case about property damage, that the standard of proof was preponderance of evidence, that the jury's job was to determine whether Karren had intentionally damaged my garden, and if so, what compensation was appropriate. Then Chen stood to give his opening statement. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about what happens when someone in a position of authority abuses that power to punish someone who dared to question them. Adrian Porter did everything right. He bought a home in Willow Creek, submitted a landscaping plan to the HOA, received approval, and spent 6 months creating a garden to honor his late mother. That garden included heirloom tomato plants grown from his mother's seeds, rose cuttings from her garden, a trellis she built with her own hands. It was a place of memory and healing. Then Adrian received a violation notice from Karren Whitmore, the HOA president, claiming his garden broke the rules. Adrian showed her the approval, proved he'd followed every guideline. Karren didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge her mistake. Instead, she waited until the middle of the night, drove a riding mower through Adrian's garden, and destroyed everything. We have video of her doing it. We have evidence of the damage. And we're going to prove that Karren Whitmore deliberately destroyed Adrian's garden because he had the audacity to challenge her authority. When people in power face no consequences for their actions, they continue to abuse that power. Your job is to send a message that this behavior is unacceptable, that Karren Whitmore will be held accountable for what she did. It was a strong opening, clear and direct. Some of the jurors were already looking at Karren with skepticism. Stroud's opening was what I expected. He painted Karren as a dedicated volunteer trying to maintain neighborhood standards, argued that any damage was accidental during legitimate HOA work, claimed that I'd been uncooperative and had installed the garden knowing it might cause issues. It was the best he could do with a weak case, but it didn't have the ring of truth that Chen's statement did. I was the first witness. Chen walked me through my background, my job at the hospital, the loss of my mother, the decision to buy a house in her dream neighborhood. He had me describe the process of planning the garden, getting approval, planting each element. "Tell the jury about your mother's rose cuttings," Chen said. I took a breath. This was the part I'd been dreading. My mother grew roses for 30 years. She learned from her grandmother, who brought cuttings from Virginia when she moved to North Carolina. They were old varieties, not the kind you can buy in stores. When my mother got sick, she asked me to take cuttings so the roses wouldn't die with her. I kept them alive in pots for 2 years. I didn't have a place to plant them. After I bought the house, after I finally felt ready, I planted them in the garden. They bloomed for the first time last summer. How did you feel when you saw them blooming? Like my mother was still here in a way, like something of her survived. And when you saw they'd been destroyed? I had to pause, swallow hard, like I'd lost her all over again. Chen let that sit for a moment before continuing. He showed the jury photos of the garden before and after, walked through the video footage, had me identify Karren in the video, and confirmed that the trellis she'd destroyed was the one my mother built. When it was Stroud's turn for cross-examination, he tried to undermine my credibility, suggesting I was exaggerating the emotional significance of the garden, that I was pursuing this lawsuit for financial gain rather than justice. Mr. Porter, you're seeking $30,000 in damages for what amounts to some plants and a wooden trellis, correct? I'm seeking compensation for what was destroyed. Yes. Isn't it true that most of what you planted can be replaced for a few $100s at a garden center? The heirloom tomatoes can't be replaced. Those seeds came from my mother's plants, which came from her grandmother's plants. They're not sold commercially. And the roses were cuttings from my mother's garden. You can't buy those anywhere. But you could buy similar roses, couldn't you? They wouldn't be the same roses. To you, perhaps. But objectively, a rose is a rose, isn't it? Chen objected. Argumentative, Your Honor. Sustained, Judge Owens said. Move on, Mr. Stroud. Stroud tried a few more angles but didn't get anywhere. I stuck to the facts, didn't let him twist my words, and eventually he gave up. The next witness was Officer Martinez, who testified about responding to my call, reviewing the video evidence, and documenting the damage. She was professional and clear, making it obvious that this was a straightforward case of property destruction. Then, Chen called his expert, a landscape architect named Dr. Lisa Brennan, who'd reviewed the damage photos and calculated replacement costs. She testified that the heirloom plants had significant value, that the custom trellis was a piece of craftsmanship that would cost thousands to replicate, that the emotional harm of losing irreplaceable plants was a real factor in valuation. In your professional opinion, what would it cost to restore Mr. Porter's garden to its original condition? Chen asked. Assuming you could source equivalent heirloom varieties and commission a replica trellis, I'd estimate $15,000 to $20,000. But full restoration isn't possible because some of the plants were unique and irreplaceable. In cases like that, we assess the value based on the time and care invested, the rarity of the specimens, and the personal significance. I'd place the total value at $25,000 to $30,000. Stroud challenged her methodology on cross-examination, but didn't really damage her credibility. She was too experienced, too confident in her analysis. The first day ended there. I went home exhausted, called Hannah to debrief, and tried not to think about the next day when Karren would take the stand. The second day of trial started with more witnesses from my side. Chen called 2 of my neighbors, both of whom testified that they'd never had problems with my garden, that it was attractive and well-maintained, that Karren had seemed unusually hostile toward me for reasons they didn't understand. One of them, an older man named George who lived 3 houses down, added something I hadn't expected. I've lived in Willow Creek for 12 years, George said. I've seen Karren go after people before. Usually it's someone who questions her, who doesn't just accept her rulings. She doesn't handle disagreement well. She gets vindictive. I've watched her force people to change things that weren't actually violations, just things she personally didn't like. Adrian's garden was one of those situations. She didn't like that he pushed back when she tried to claim it was unauthorized. Stroud objected, claiming it was speculation, but Judge Owens allowed it as character evidence. It painted a picture of Karren that matched everything I'd experienced. Then it was the defense's turn. Stroud called Karren to the stand, and she walked up with her head high, the picture of injured dignity. Under Stroud's questioning, she repeated her story about drainage work, about poor lighting, about accidentally crossing property lines. She claimed she'd been trying to protect the neighborhood from flooding, that she took her responsibilities seriously, that the damage to my garden was an unfortunate accident. "Did you know Mr. Porter had heirloom plants in that garden?" Stroud asked. "I had no idea," Karren said. "I don't make it my business to know what every resident plants. I was focused on the drainage issue, not on landscaping details." "When you learned that Mr. Porter was upset about the damage, what did you do?" "I attempted to explain that it was accidental, that the HOA would work with him to address any concerns. He refused to listen. Instead, he filed this lawsuit, making wild accusations about my intentions." "Do you believe you did anything wrong?" "I believe I was doing my job as HOA president. Could I have been more careful? Perhaps, but I was responding to an emergency situation at an unusual hour. I did the best I could under difficult circumstances." It was a decent performance, sympathetic enough that it might have worked if not for the video evidence. But when Chen stood up for cross-examination, he systematically dismantled every word of it. "Ms. Whitmore, you testified that you were responding to a call about standing water in the common area, correct?" "Yes." "Who called you?" "I don't recall the specific resident." "You don't recall? This was supposedly an emergency serious enough that you had to address it at 2 in the morning. But you don't remember who called?" "I received many calls from residents. I can't remember everyone." "Do you have phone records showing a call that night?" Karren hesitated. "I may have. I haven't checked." "You've had 3 months to check your phone records, Ms. Whitmore. Did you receive a call or not?" "I believe I did." "You believe? Do you have any evidence of this call?" "Not with me." "No." "Convenient." Chen moved on before Stroud could object. "You also testified that you were conducting drainage work. Where exactly was the drainage problem located?" "In the common area near Mr. Porter's property." "Show me on this map." Chen pulled up a subdivision map on the courtroom monitor. Karren stared at it, clearly trying to figure out what to say. "The area is difficult to pinpoint exactly," she finally said. "Try." "Somewhere in the green space adjacent to the eastern property line." "That's 40 feet from where my client's garden is located. You're telling this jury that you accidentally drove a mower 40 feet off course?" "The lighting was poor. The property boundaries aren't clearly marked." "Ms. Whitmore, the video shows you driving in a deliberate pattern through the raised garden beds, circling back, crushing specific areas. Does that look like someone who's lost and confused about property lines?" "I was trying to complete the work efficiently." "By destroying someone's garden?" "I didn't realize I was in a garden. I thought I was in an unmaintained area." Chen pulled up photos of the garden taken the day before the destruction. The raised beds were clearly visible, neat rows of staked tomato plants, stone borders, everything obviously intentional and maintained. "This looks unmaintained to you?" "At night, in poor lighting, it was difficult to see details." "The motion sensor lights came on, Ms. Whitmore. We can see in the video that you had plenty of light to see what you were driving through." Karren's composure slipped slightly. "I was focused on the task." "So focused that you didn't notice you were destroying raised garden beds, crushing plants, breaking a wooden trellis?" "It was an accident." "Ms. Whitmore, let me ask you directly. Were you angry that Adrian Porter had challenged your violation notice?" "No. I issue violation notices regularly. Residents challenge them sometimes. It's part of the process." "But Mr. Porter didn't just challenge it. He proved you were wrong. He showed you written approval for his garden. That must have been embarrassing." "I wasn't embarrassed. The approval was questionable, and I was investigating." "Is that why you sent him another violation notice after you destroyed his garden? Because you were investigating?" "That violation notice was for the continued presence of an unapproved structure." "A structure you'd already destroyed?" Karren opened her mouth, then closed it. Stroud looked pained. "The violation notice was sent as part of standard procedures," Karren finally said. "Standard procedure is to destroy someone's property and then fine them for having it?" "That's not what happened." "Then what did happen, Ms. Whitmore? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you abused your position as HOA president to retaliate against a resident who dared to question your authority. You drove through his garden deliberately, you destroyed irreplaceable plants, and then you tried to cover it up by claiming it was an accident. Isn't that the truth?" "No, that is not the truth." "You expect this jury to believe that all of this was just an unfortunate accident?" "Yes." Chen let the word hang in the air for a moment, then turned to the jury with an expression that said everything about how little he believed that answer. No further questions. Stroud tried to rehabilitate Karren on redirect, having her emphasize her years of volunteer service, her dedication to the neighborhood, her lack of any malicious intent. But the damage was done. Chen had systematically exposed every hole in her story, and the jury had seen it happen. The defense rested without calling any other witnesses. Stroud didn't have anyone else who could support Karren's version of events. Closing arguments were that afternoon. Stroud went first, making an impassioned plea for the jury to see this as a simple accident, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an emotional plaintiff seeking a payday. Yes, damage occurred, Stroud said. Karren Whitmore acknowledges that. But accidents happen. People make mistakes. That doesn't mean she should be punished with a massive financial judgment for trying to do her job under difficult circumstances. Adrian Porter wants you to believe this was some vindictive attack, but the evidence simply doesn't support that. What the evidence shows is a dedicated volunteer making an error in judgment late at night while trying to protect the neighborhood. That's not malice. That's human imperfection, and human imperfection doesn't deserve a $30,000 penalty. Then Chen stood, and his closing was everything I'd hoped for. The defense wants you to believe this was an accident, an unfortunate mistake, a simple error. Ladies and gentlemen, watch the video again and tell me if that looks like an accident. He played the footage once more, Karren's face clear in the motion sensor light, the deliberate path through the garden undeniable. That is not confusion. That is not poor lighting. That is intentional destruction. Karren Whitmore knew exactly what she was doing. She drove through raised garden beds, crushing plants, breaking structures, circling back to make sure the damage was complete. And why? Because Adrian Porter had the audacity to challenge her. Because he proved her wrong when she issued a violation notice. Because he didn't bow to her authority. Karren Whitmore has been HOA president for 6 years. She's used to people doing what she says, accepting her rulings without question. Adrian didn't do that. He stood up for himself. He showed her documentation proving his garden was approved, and she couldn't handle it. So she waited until the middle of the night, when no one would see, and she destroyed something Adrian had built to honor his late mother. She destroyed heirloom plants that can never be replaced. She destroyed rose cuttings that had been in his family for generations. She destroyed a trellis his mother built with her own hands. And then she lied about it. She claimed it was drainage work, even though there was no drainage problem. She claimed it was an accident, even though the video shows deliberate action. She sent a violation notice afterward, trying to justify her actions retroactively. Everything about her behavior shows consciousness of guilt. She knows what she did. She just doesn't think she should have to face consequences for it. Your job today is to prove her wrong. Your job is to hold Karren Whitmore accountable for abusing her power and destroying something precious to punish someone who dared to disagree with her. The law allows you to award compensatory damages to make Adrian whole, to compensate him for what he lost. It also allows punitive damages to punish willful, malicious conduct and to deter others from similar behavior. We're asking for $30,000 total, $20,000 in compensatory damages to cover the value of what was destroyed, $10,000 in punitive damages to make it clear that abuse of power carries consequences. That's not excessive. That's justice. The jury got the case at 4 p.m. Judge Owens sent them to deliberate, and we waited. Chen said jury deliberations could take hours or days, that there was no way to predict. Some juries reached verdicts quickly when the evidence was clear. Others debated every detail. We waited in a conference room down the hall. Hannah showed up after work, bringing coffee and nervous energy. The three of us sat there, not talking much, just waiting. At 6:30, we got word. The jury had reached a verdict. We filed back into the courtroom. Karren and Stroud were already there, both looking tense. The jury filed in, their faces neutral and unreadable. Judge Owens addressed the foreperson. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor. Please read it." The foreperson, a middle-aged woman in a cardigan, stood and read from the verdict form. In the matter of Adrian Porter versus Karren Whitmore, We, the jury, find in favor of the plaintiff. We award compensatory damages in the amount of $22,000 and punitive damages in the amount of $15,000 for a total award of $37,000. I felt the words hit me like a physical thing, relief and vindication and exhaustion all at once. $37,000, more than we'd asked for. Karren's face went pale, then red. She turned to Stroud, said something harsh that I couldn't hear. He shook his head, looking defeated. Judge Owens thanked the jury and dismissed them, then turned to Karren. Ms. Whitmore, the jury has found that you intentionally destroyed Mr. Porter's property. As part of this judgment, I'm also issuing a permanent injunction preventing you from having any contact with Mr. Porter or his property. Violation of that injunction will result in contempt charges. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor, Karren said, her voice barely audible. We were dismissed. Outside the courtroom, Chen shook my hand, grinning. That was a hell of a verdict, he said. The jury gave you more than we asked for. That almost never happens. They clearly wanted to send a message. What happens now? Karren has 30 days to pay the judgment. If she doesn't, we can pursue collection, which might mean placing a lien on her property or garnishing wages. Most people pay rather than deal with that. You should see the money within a month. I thanked him, exhausted and relieved, and not quite able to process what had just happened. Hannah hugged me tight. You did it, she said. Karren finally faced consequences. We did it, I corrected. You helped me through all of this. We went to dinner, a little place downtown that Hannah loved, and finally let ourselves relax. It was over. The lawsuit, the stress, all of it. Over. The news spread through Willow Creek faster than I expected. By the next day, half the neighborhood knew about the verdict. Some people congratulated me, relieved to see Karren taken down a peg. Others were quieter, probably friends of hers, uncomfortable with the whole situation. Within a week, there was a special meeting of the HOA board. Karren resigned as president. The official statement said she was stepping down to focus on family, but everyone knew the truth. 2 other board members resigned with her, leaving the HOA leadership essentially vacant. An interim board was appointed, people who'd been pushing for reform for years. They immediately started reviewing Karren's decisions, reversing some of the more egregious violations she'd issued, investigating the financial irregularities Chen had uncovered during discovery. It turned out Karren had been using HOA funds improperly for years. The new board filed a complaint with the North Carolina Attorney General's office. An investigation was launched. By March, Karren was facing charges for misappropriation of HOA funds, a felony that carried potential jail time. I didn't take any satisfaction in that. The lawsuit had been about my garden, about holding her accountable for what she'd done to me. But the criminal charges were about a pattern of behavior that went beyond any one incident. Karren had been abusing her position for years, and now it was all catching up to her. The judgment was paid in full by mid-February. $37,000 appeared in my bank account, surreal and overwhelming. Chen took his cut, which left me with about $25,000 after legal fees. I didn't spend it right away. I let it sit there while I figured out what to do. Hannah and I talked about the garden, about whether I wanted to rebuild it in the same spot. Part of me wanted to. It felt like giving up to let Karren's destruction be permanent. But another part couldn't face going back to that space, couldn't stand the idea of looking at it every day and remembering. What if we did something different? Hannah suggested one evening in early March. We were sitting on my patio, the weather finally warming up enough to be outside. Something for the whole neighborhood. Like what? A community garden. There's that empty lot at the end of Birch Street, the one the HOA owns but never developed. We could petition to turn it into garden plots for anyone who wants one, make it a shared space. The idea settled into me slowly, taking shape. A community garden. Not just my private grief and healing, but something others could use too, something that turned Karren's destruction into creation. That could work, I said. Would people be interested? I think so. A lot of residents have talked about wanting gardens, but not having the space or knowledge. We could organize it, get volunteers to help build the beds, maybe do workshops on gardening techniques. We spent the next month developing the proposal. Hannah did the design work, laying out individual plots and common areas, planning irrigation and pathways. I handled the HOA side, working with the new interim board to get approval. They were enthusiastic, seeing it as a way to heal the community after Karren's years of divisive leadership. By April, we had approval and funding. The HOA allocated money for materials, matching what I was willing to contribute from the judgment. Other residents donated time and labor. On a warm Saturday in late April, over 40 people showed up to help build the Willow Creek Community Garden. We worked all day, constructing raised beds, running water lines, laying mulch paths. Kids helped paint signs. Older residents contributed plants from their own gardens, cuttings and divisions and seeds. Someone brought a truck full of compost. Someone else showed up with lunch for everyone. By sunset, we had 20 individual plots and a large communal bed for vegetables. Hannah and I took 2 plots side by side, planning what we'd plant. I saved some seeds, I told her quietly while we were working. From the heirloom tomatoes, I found a few fruits that had fallen before Karren destroyed everything. I dried the seeds. They might grow. Hannah's eyes got bright. That's perfect. Your mother's tomatoes in the community garden. She'd love that. I think she would. We planted the following week. Cherokee purple and brandywine seedlings started from those saved seeds. I didn't have the rose cuttings anymore, but someone donated a climbing rose for the fence line, and I accepted it as a different kind of memorial. Not my mother's roses, but beautiful anyway. The garden grew through spring and into summer. People who'd never met started talking over the fence lines between plots, sharing advice and produce and stories. Kids who'd spent their whole lives thinking food came from grocery stores learned to pull carrots from the ground. The neighborhood felt different, more connected, less about enforcement and rules and more about community. I saw Karren once during that time in the grocery store parking lot. She saw me too, started to turn away, then stopped. For a moment we just looked at each other. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. The trial had aged her, or maybe just revealed what had been there all along. She didn't speak, neither did I. After a moment she got in her car and drove away. The criminal case went to trial in June. I didn't attend, but Hannah followed it and kept me updated. The evidence of financial misappropriation was clear. Multiple instances of Karren using HOA funds for personal expenses, falsifying records, steering contracts to family members. The jury convicted her on 3 felony counts. The judge sentenced her to 2 years in prison, suspended to probation, plus restitution to the HOA and community service. It was a light sentence considering, but it meant Karren had a felony record, was on probation for 2 years, and was effectively barred from ever holding HOA leadership again. I felt strange when I heard the news. Not triumphant, not satisfied, just tired. Karren had done real damage, and now she was facing consequences, but none of it brought back my mother's roses or the first version of the garden. Justice didn't undo harm. It just acknowledged it and tried to prevent it from happening again. The summer progressed. The community garden flourished. My heirloom tomatoes produced exactly like my mother's used to, heavy clusters of deep purple and pink-red fruit. I picked the first ripe Cherokee purple on a morning in late July, held it in my hand, and felt something settle that had been unsettled for a long time. Hannah and I spent most evenings at the garden, working our plots, talking to neighbors, watching the sunset. Her divorce was finalized in May, officially ending a chapter that had been closed emotionally for years. She seemed lighter afterward, more present, more willing to think about the future. "I've been thinking about taking on freelance design clients again," she said one evening while we were watering. "I miss the creative work, and the community garden reminded me that I'm good at this." "You should," I said. "You designed something that brought people together. That's rare." "We designed it," she corrected. "I drew the plans. You made it happen. Then we're a good team." She smiled, and something in that smile suggested she was thinking beyond garden designs and HOA battles, toward something neither of us had quite articulated yet. By August, the garden had become a neighborhood fixture. People gave directions using it as a landmark. Kids asked their parents when they could go back to pick beans. Someone organized a harvest party for September, planning to share produce and recipes and celebrate what we'd all built together. I reduced my hours at the hospital, wanting more time for things that mattered. Nursing was important work, but I'd been hiding in it, using the long shifts to avoid dealing with grief and loneliness. The garden had shown me there were other ways to live, ways that involved community and creation instead of just getting through each day. Hannah and I started spending more time together outside the garden, having dinner, going to movies, taking walks around the neighborhood. It wasn't dating exactly, or maybe it was, and neither of us wanted to name it yet. We were both rebuilding from loss, both learning how to let new things grow. One evening in early September, we were sitting in the garden after everyone else had left, watching the light fade, and Hannah said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me be part of this, the garden, the lawsuit, all of it. When I moved here, I was so closed off. Didn't want to know anyone, didn't want to invest in anything that could be taken away. You pulled me out of that without even trying. Just by being willing to be vulnerable, to care about something enough to fight for it." "I couldn't have done it without you," I said honestly. "You were there from the beginning. You helped me see what was possible." "So we helped each other." "Yeah, we did." She leaned her head on my shoulder, and we sat there while the fireflies came out and the neighborhood settled into evening quiet. It felt like an ending and a beginning at the same time, the closing of one chapter and the slow opening of another. The harvest party happened on a perfect Saturday in late September. Over 100 people showed up, bringing dishes made from garden produce, setting up tables in the common area, celebrating what had grown from destruction. The interim HOA board gave a speech thanking everyone who'd volunteered, specifically mentioning Hannah and me for the initial vision. People toasted with lemonade and iced tea. Kids ran around with dirt-stained hands. The Cherokee purple tomatoes were a hit, people asking for seeds to grow their own next year. I stood at the edge of it all with Hannah, taking it in. This had started with tire tracks through my mother's roses, with anger and grief and the worst parts of human pettiness. It had become this, a space where people came together, where kids learned to grow food, where neighbors became friends. "Your mom would be proud," Hannah said quietly, like she was reading my mind. "I think so too." Karren's name didn't come up once during the party. She wasn't part of this. She'd been removed from her position of power, held accountable in both civil and criminal court, and now she was just another resident dealing with the consequences of her actions. The neighborhood had moved on. As fall set in and the garden started its natural decline toward winter, Hannah and I made plans for the next season. We talked about expanding the plots, adding a greenhouse, maybe starting a seed library. The community garden had become bigger than either of us, but we were still at its heart, still the ones people came to with questions and ideas. "Do you think you'll ever rebuild your original garden?" Hannah asked one October evening. We were closing up the community garden for the day, securing the gate, checking the water. "Maybe," I said. "Someday. Right now I like this better. It feels like the grief turned into something that helps other people, not just me." "That's a good transformation." "Yeah, it is." We walked back toward our houses, the street quiet in the dusk. The neighborhood felt different than it had a year ago, less controlled, more alive. The new HOA board was competent but not oppressive, focused on actual maintenance and services rather than enforcement for its own sake. People were painting their doors in unapproved colors without fear. Someone had put up a little free library without asking permission. Small rebellions that would have enraged Karren, but that made Willow Creek feel more like a community and less like a regime. At my driveway, Hannah paused. "I'm glad you fought back," she said. "A lot of people would have just let it go, not wanted the hassle of a lawsuit. You didn't. You stood up to her even when it was hard." "I had help," I reminded her. "Still, it mattered, not just for you. For everyone Karren had pushed around over the years, they saw that she could be held accountable. That changed things." She was right. The verdict had rippled through the neighborhood in ways I hadn't anticipated, emboldening people to question authority, to push back against arbitrary rules, to remember that the HOA was supposed to serve them, not control them. "Do you want to come in?" I asked. "I made chili." "Is that your way of asking me to dinner?" "It might be," she smiled. "Then yes." We went inside, and the conversation shifted to easier things, to recipes and weekend plans and whether the forecast was right about the first frost. But underneath it, there was an acknowledgement that something had shifted between us, that we'd moved from neighbors to friends to something more. slowly and carefully and without any dramatic declarations. It felt right. We'd both been through enough upheaval. We didn't need grand gestures. We needed steady, reliable, the kind of growth that happened gradually and lasted. Winter came, and the community garden went dormant, but plans for spring were already underway. 20 more people had signed up for plots. The HOA approved funding for the greenhouse. Hannah drew up designs that were beautiful and practical, incorporating raised beds accessible for people with disabilities, a children's area with sunflowers and pumpkins, a pollinator garden full of native plants. I used some of the remaining judgment money to fund scholarships for families who couldn't afford the plot fees, wanting to make sure the garden was truly accessible to everyone. It felt like the right use for that money, turning Karren's destruction into opportunity for people who needed it. By the time spring rolled around again, Hannah and I were together in the way that had been building for months. No single moment defined it, just a gradual intertwining of lives and plans and futures. She was at my house more often than our own. We planned the community garden expansion together. We talked about longer-term things, about whether I'd sell my house and we'd buy something together, about what came next. The second planting season at the community garden was even better than the first. The new plots filled immediately. The greenhouse meant we could start seeds earlier, extend the growing season. Kids who'd participated the first year came back with more knowledge and enthusiasm, teaching younger kids what they had learned. I planted Cherokee purple and brandywine tomatoes again, from seeds saved from the previous year's harvest. They grew exactly as they were supposed to, thick vines heavy with fruit, the genetic line continuing. My mother's tomatoes, still alive, still producing, still connecting me to her and to the generations before her who'd kept these seeds going. In June, the news came that Karren's probation had been revoked. She'd violated the terms somehow, the details weren't clear, and the judge had activated her suspended sentence. She'd serve 6 months in prison, starting immediately. I felt a complicated mix of emotions when I heard. Part of me thought 6 months was deserved after years of abuse of power. Part of me just felt sad that it had come to this, that someone had chosen pettiness and control over community and cooperation, and now was paying the price. "Do you regret the lawsuit?" Hannah asked when we talked about it. "No," I said after thinking about it. "I regret that it was necessary." But it was. Karren needed to be stopped, and the lawsuit did that. Everything that came after, the criminal charges and the rest, that was on her. She made choices that led there. "You gave her a chance to do the right thing. She chose not to." "Yeah." We didn't talk about Karren much after that. She wasn't part of our lives anymore, wasn't part of the neighborhood in any meaningful way. Her house went up for sale in July. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were moving to Florida after she got out of prison, starting over somewhere no one knew their history. The community garden continued to thrive. By midsummer, it was producing more vegetables than the plot holders could use. We started a donation program, taking excess produce to the local food bank, to senior centers, to anyone who needed it. The garden became known beyond Willow Creek, featured in the local newspaper, used as a model for other neighborhoods considering similar projects. Hannah's freelance design business took off. She had more clients than she could handle, municipalities and organizations wanting her to replicate what she'd done in Willow Creek. She was happy in a way I hadn't seen before, confident and creative and fully present. We celebrated the 1-year anniversary of the community garden with another harvest party, this one even bigger than the first. Looking around at the crowd, at the kids playing and the families sharing food and the plots full of growing things, I felt something I hadn't felt since before my mother died. Peace. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something good that had grown from it. The garden hadn't brought my mother back. It hadn't erased what Karren had done. But it had created something living and generative, something that would continue beyond me, beyond Hannah, beyond anyone currently involved. That evening, after everyone had left and we were cleaning up, Hannah said, "I've been thinking." About? About buying a house together, about making this official, whatever this is between us. Is that a proposal? Maybe, is that an answer? I laughed, pulling her close. Yes? It's an answer. We stayed at the garden until the stars came out, making plans, talking about the future, in ways that felt possible instead of frightening. We'd both been broken in different ways by loss and divorce and the cruelty of people like Karren. But we'd found each other in the wreckage, helped each other rebuild, created something beautiful out of destruction. The tomatoes would grow again next year. The garden would expand. The neighborhood would continue healing from Karren's years of toxic leadership. And Hannah and I would be there, tending what we'd planted, watching it grow, building a life that honored the past while reaching toward the future. That was the story. Not Karren destroying my garden, though that had happened. Not the trial, though that had been necessary. The real story was what came after, what grew from the ruins, what happened when people chose creation over control, community over dominance, love over fear. The garden taught me that. My mother had known it all along, spending 30 years nurturing roses, saving seeds, passing down knowledge. She'd taught me that growing things required patience and care and the willingness to get your hands dirty. That some plants took years to establish but lasted generations once they did. That destruction was easy, but creation, real creation, took time and effort and love. Karren had tried to destroy what I built to honor my mother. In doing so, she'd given me the opportunity to build something even better, something that helped dozens of families, something that brought a neighborhood together, something that led me to Hannah into a future I hadn't imagined was possible. In the end, the judge had trampled Karren's weak defense in court, but the real victory was here, in this garden, in this community, in this life that had grown from the ashes of her cruelty. She'd thought she could break me by destroying my mother's roses. Instead, she'd shown me how to grow something bigger than any one person's grief, something that would outlast both of us, something that actually mattered. The Cherokee purple tomatoes were ripening in the late summer heat, heavy and sweet and perfect. I picked one, still warm from the sun, and shared it with Hannah. It tasted like home, like memory, like everything that had survived and continued to grow despite people like Karren trying to crush it into nothing. That was the victory. Not the judgment money or the criminal conviction or Karren's prison sentence. The victory was this moment, this tomato, this woman beside me, this garden full of life, this neighborhood healed and growing. The victory was refusing to let destruction be the end of the story, choosing instead to plant something new and watch it flourish. The sun set over the Willow Creek Community Garden, casting long shadows across the plots, and somewhere in that golden light, I felt my mother's presence, proud of what her roses had become, proud of what her son had built from their ashes, proud that the seeds she'd saved and the knowledge she'd passed down were still growing, still feeding people, still creating beauty in a world that needed it. That was enough. That was everything.